Welcome back to Sunday AM. Now, our next guest has one of the toughest jobs in the business, as the agricultural sector, worth $11 billion, is under serious threat by the beast that is Brexit. Joe
Healy, President of the Irish Farmers Association, is with us to tell us about this and his relatively new post with the organisation. Joe, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So, Joe, these are, challenging times, to say the least, with Brexit looming and the Irish agriculture sector, so dependent as it is, a large sector of it, on the UK. How do you feel preparations are going for Brexit?
Well, I think, it's the great unknown. We had a big event out in Goffs, organised by the IFA earlier on this year, where we had main speakers, Commissioner Hogan, our own Minister, Minister Creed, Mairead McGuinness. And really what the idea of it was to pose the questions and highlight the issues and the problems. There are no answers yet. We don't know where this is going to finish up. And it's that uncertainty in the short term that's actually causing a lot of harm. We saw, the currency move from 76 pence in the euro up to 88. And there was a lot of movement. We went through a period where anytime anyone opened their mouth, there was another movement in currency. And that affects us as an exporting nation. Like, we export 90% of our beef. 50% of that goes to the UK. And 45% goes to the EU, but half of all that goes to the EU travels through the UK to get there. 90% of our mushrooms go to the UK. Most of our cheddar cheese, and there aren't really alternative markets for those at the moment.
At the moment, I suppose the point there, and that's something we might get a chance to discuss in a little while. But if you take, I suppose, a step back from this, Britain leaving the EU is going to leave a gap of somewhere between 10 and 12 billion. That's what they contribute more than they take from the EU at the moment. That money is going to have to be found elsewhere, and there is talk about looking at the other crises in the EU, from immigration to defence and so on and may go. Do you feel that there is enough representation? Is Phil Hogan doing enough? Is Michael Creed doing enough to keep the common agricultural policy where Ireland and where farmers believe it should be in terms of securing it into the future?
Look, in fairness, they're doing all they can. They're very aware of the issues. As late as last week, we were in at a meeting with Commissioner Ottinger, Commissioner for the Budget and Human Resources, and he highlighted the issues that you've highlighted, the whole of the 10 to 13 billion for the EU budget. That would leave a whole of 5 to 6 billion in the cap. The security measures, defence, migration, you name it, that was another 10 billion. Now, new issues deserve new money, as far as we're concerned. He did float the idea of increasing the contributions from each of the member states up to 1.1% of GFI. So that's, whether that happens or not,
money has to be found somewhere as well, doesn't it? From each country's individual pot.
Yes, but it has, and he was very clear in the people that lobby groups needed to meet were the heads of state, ministers for finance, ministers for foreign affairs, and the commissioner from each country.
Joe, you're a spokesperson for the farming community in this country. So what are people telling you? What are their concerns and their anxieties? What's top of their mind?
Well, top of the farmers' minds at the moment is, what is Brexit going to do? What type of a Brexit are we going to have?
To break it down to a personal level, what does it mean for them?
Exactly what it means for them. And if you look at, people might say, well, they're IFA figures, but if you look at the Teagasc figures or the ESRI figures, Teagasc did an analysis last year where a 10% cut in cap, followed by a hard Brexit, that would result in a loss of €2 billion alone to the beef and dairy side of it. If there's a hard Brexit and if WTO rules apply, you're talking about tariffs there of 65% on dairy products, up to 85% on meat products. It just wouldn't be, you couldn't
sustainable. But Joe, at the same time, the figures you gave already about where most of Irish agricultural produce is going is basically half and half, let's say, for rough figures, to the UK or the EU. I mean, if Brexit does happen, the worst possible Brexit, is now not the time to try and be diversifying those markets and stop exporting so much into Britain and find the other markets either in the EU or, for instance, baby milk formula going to China further afield. There's opportunities elsewhere.
It's a very fair point, and it's a point that's often made. When we joined the EU, 70% of our product was going into the UK. Now we're down to 40%, even though the value has increased. Geography and returns, or returns in geography, whatever way you want to look at it, they decide a lot of trade. the UK is our next door neighbour. The cost of getting there are a lot lower than getting anywhere else. It's a market that we have processors and farmers have invested an awful lot over the past 20, 30 years in producing a product that satisfies the taste and the culture in that market. We are, and Bord Bia are doing a very good job. We are going into about 170, 180 countries worldwide, you know, in some cases tiny amounts. And what Bord Bia are doing and what the Minister with trade missions are doing is trying to maximise, visit those, have trade missions to them, maximise those markets and the potential for those markets, and also maybe look at new markets, because you are right, we have to diverse elsewhere. I think the returns won't be as good from elsewhere.
But Joe, farming in Ireland has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, even the last 10 years, where once there were plenty of smaller farms, they've essentially been squeezed out and they're now dominated by larger farms. So what has this meant for rural life?
Well, you know, I think there are a few figures thrown out there from agriculture in Ireland. We have an annual turnover of about 26 billion euros, but 24 billion of that is retained within the country, it's within the economy. And 75% of everything, all our inputs into agriculture, is sourced within the country. So it highlights the importance of agriculture to the rural economies. But also, if you take that across Europe, 44 million people employed in agriculture across Europe. And I think that's what we have to ensure. And that's part of the work that the IFA has done over the past year, was meet our sister brother organisations right throughout the EU and politicians from all over the EU. And, you know, in the early part of it, what we were getting was, we hear ye, we understand ye, you know, but maybe they need to be taught a lesson. We can't have a situation where a country that leaves the EU is better off than a country that remains in it. But it's only when we started talking about the displacement of food product out of the UK. For example, if the 270,000 tonnes that we put into the UK goes onto the EU market, what will that do to price? And if you take it as an overall figure, 45 billion euros worth of agri-food and drink products from the EU goes into the UK market. And if that UK market isn't there, that will go back out onto the EU market. And we saw where, you know, a small amount of Russian product, when we couldn't go into Russia, what it did to prices throughout the EU.
Joe, what we've discussed has been, like, you know, I suppose the IFA's outward-looking, your lobbying role and that side of things as well. You've had a job of work to do, I presume, since you took over, of, I suppose, steadying the ship internally after, you know, the scandal over your predecessor's salary and yours now being, I suppose, what people consider perhaps more at a more appropriate level. How's that going? How is the rebuilding of confidence internally going?
It's going very well, and right throughout the campaign, you know, the more I went through the campaign, the more I wanted to be the next president of the IFA, because just the people that you met, the type of farmers that we were representing, and they just wanted the IFA to be in the news for all the right reasons. And it was a bit like, and hopefully Galway doesn't fall into that category later on today, maybe that one or two parts of it mightn't have been up to scratch, but the whole team doesn't need to be changed.
But it's the culture, I suppose, of the organisation is led from the top down, isn't it?
Well, it is in one way, and then in the other way it's very much a bottom-up organisation as well, in relation to issues that we lobby on.
On a personal note, how is it for you? I mean, you're the dad of 3 young daughters. Do you ever see your family?
I get to see them sometimes at the weekend, but then, you know, you definitely wouldn't see them during the week, because you'd be out of the country or elsewhere. Most of our time is up here in Dublin, maybe lobbying government departments in the various areas. You know, but the organisation, there's a great positive feel there at the moment. Our membership has held up very, very strongly. There was less than a 1% drop-off in membership, which showed the strength of the organisation.
Given the level of what had happened, definitely, yes.
There is a realisation out there of a need for a strong, powerful lobby organisation to represent farmers, and you know, that's what I'm lucky enough to be leading at the moment.
Well, listen, Joe, very best of luck with it, and you do have tough times ahead, but we wish you every success in that regard.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.